On a quiet April morning in 2023, a fisherman in Ocklawaha, Florida, stumbled across something that didn't belong in the calm, reed-lined waters of the Marion County Canal. Floating just beneath the surface was the lifeless body of a teenage boy, a bullet wound clean through his temple. Less than 48 hours later, two more bodies would be found, one slumped inside a vehicle, another dumped along a roadside like discarded waste. All teenagers, all executed. What initially appeared to be unrelated killings soon revealed a terrifying pattern. 3 victims, 3 precise headshots, no signs of struggle, no signs of mercy. As the town reeled from the horror, local law enforcement scrambled to contain growing public panic. Rumors flew: drug deal gone wrong, gang initiation, even serial killings. But when 2 of the suspects turned out to be children 12 and 16 years old, the narrative flipped into something darker, more incomprehensible. The youngest suspect, barely out of elementary school, confessed to luring the victims. The oldest? He was already wearing an ankle monitor, placed there after a violent carjacking. Yet he still managed to orchestrate what the court would later call a premeditated execution of his peers. 3 young lives were erased in less than 72 hours. But the bigger question remained: how did 3 teens become 3 killers? And why did they turn on their own? This isn't a story about gang violence or chance. It's a story about youth, manipulation, and the brutal collapse of innocence. And it began with 3 bodies and one terrifying plan. What happened in Ocklawaha that turned children into calculated killers? Before the mugshots, before the courtroom silence, before the life sentences, Tahj Brewton was just another teenager blending into the background of Marion County's underfunded neighborhoods. A wiry 6-year-old with a hard stare and a reputation for trouble that didn't quite match his baby face. Raised in the turbulence of broken homes and broken systems, he was a product of neglect, but also a cultivator of calculated rage. By the time of the murders, he was already under juvenile supervision, wearing an ankle monitor for carjacking. Yet, as one detective would later note, he moved like a ghost every step, premeditated. Those around him described him as quiet, withdrawn, but there were signs: an obsession with dominance, a tendency to test boundaries, and a cold detachment that made others uneasy. He wasn't loud. He was listening, calculating. Then there was Christopher Atkins, just 12 years old when the killings happened. His small frame and soft-spoken demeanor betrayed nothing of the role he would play. He wasn't the leader. He was the tool molded, manipulated, and ultimately weaponized. He had no prior criminal record, but fell easily under Brewton's influence. It wasn't brute force that drew him in. It was control. Tahj had it, and Christopher craved it. The third suspect, Robert Robinson, lingered somewhere in the middle. Older than Atkins, younger than Brewton. A follower, but not innocent. His fate would come later, but his presence that night would leave blood on his hands. As for the victims, Michael Hodo Jr., Layla Silvernail, and Camille Quarles, they weren't strangers to the suspects. These weren't random killings. They were peers. Some were friends. One was rumored to be romantically involved. That's what made it so much worse. The betrayal was intimate. What kind of relationship collapses into calculated murder? What dynamic inside this teenage triangle turned into a kill list? This wasn't just a crime. It was a breakdown of trust, community, and innocence, led by a 6-year-old who, in the words of the judge, orchestrated death without pretense or justification. Was Tahj Brewton born a predator, or shaped into one by a system that failed to see him coming? The timeline was short, the impact eternal. Between the 30th of March and the 1st of April, 2023, 3 teenagers were murdered in quick succession across rural Marion County. The brutality was not only in the act, it was in the methodical sequence, the cold detachment, the sheer absence of hesitation. The first to die was Layla Silvernail, a 6-year-old cheerleader known for her bright spirit and unwavering loyalty. She was found clinging to life near a dumpster, a single gunshot wound to her head. Her body was discovered in a ditch on the side of SE 183rd Avenue Road, still warm. She died at the hospital, but not before her name ignited headlines and panic. Roughly 24 hours later, authorities found a second body that of Camille Quarles, just 16, hidden in the trunk of a silver Chevy Cruze submerged in a retention pond. The car was registered to Layla. The theory: she'd been driving, unaware she was ferrying her own killer and his next victim. Then came Michael Hodo Jr., 17. His body was found dumped beside a rural road, shot in the head, left like refuse. All three bore the same execution-style wound. All three were killed by people they trusted. Investigators were stunned not by the deaths, but by the precision. This wasn't chaotic gunplay. This was planning, selection, elimination. Detectives traced the final movements of the victims. Cell phone pings, surveillance footage, social media messages. They discovered that all three had been together in the hours leading up to the killings, riding around in the Cruze, laughing, sharing Snapchats. Somewhere between a convenience store and the remote backroads of Ocklawaha, everything changed. According to testimony, it was Tahj Brewton who planned the entire chain of events. The motive? Fluid. Some speculated it was about a botched gun sale. Others pointed to internal disputes over a string of robberies. But the most disturbing theory came from the prosecution. It was all about control. Brewton wanted to send a message to peers, to rivals, to anyone who doubted him. One victim was shot inside the car. Another was lured out under false pretenses. The third was forced to beg for her life before being discarded like nothing. Even more chilling, Brewton committed the murders while on juvenile probation, having previously carjacked a man at gunpoint. He had been fitted with an ankle monitor, but managed to remove it days before the killings. He knew exactly what he was doing, and exactly how to do it. The youngest accomplice, Christopher Atkins, later told investigators that he acted out of fear. He claimed Brewton threatened to kill him if he didn't comply, but his account changed multiple times. At one point, he said he didn't realize they were going to die. Then he admitted helping lure the victims into the car. In either version, the fact remained: he was present at all three murder scenes. Blood spatter analysis confirmed that the gun had been fired at close range, a 9mm, likely semi-automatic. 1 round, each time. Clean, efficient. Crime scene photos revealed more than just violence. They revealed a pattern. No signs of struggle, no frantic defense wounds, just stillness, surrender. As one detective put it, this wasn't a burst of rage. It was a decision, and it was made long before the first shot was fired. Local media scrambled to make sense of the timeline. How could 3 murders happen over multiple days in a small county without someone sounding the alarm? The truth was even harder to digest. Each victim was killed hours after being declared missing. The trio of killers had time. Time to escape, time to think, time to kill again. By the time law enforcement pieced together the connection between the 3 bodies, Tahj Brewton had already vanished, sparking a statewide manhunt. Authorities released his name, his photo, and the chilling announcement: he is armed and dangerous. He has killed before. He will kill again. He was caught days later, hiding in a heavily wooded area, surrounded by stolen weapons, half-eaten snacks, and the quiet confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable. When interrogated, Brewton showed no remorse, no panic. He refused to answer basic questions. His silence was more telling than a confession. As investigators reconstructed the 3-day spree, the motive continued to elude them. Revenge? Power? A need to feel invincible? Or was it, as one profiler later said, an adolescent's fantasy of dominance, fulfilled through the only language he understood: violence? 3 murders, 3 teens, 3 families destroyed. But beneath the brutality lay a far more terrifying question. Was this the act of a monster, or the symptom of a generation left to rot in silence? When the first body was found, the Marion County Sheriff's Office treated it as an isolated homicide. But by the time the 3rd teenager was discovered shot, dumped, and decomposing, the pattern became impossible to ignore. The rural landscape of Ocklawaha had become a silent graveyard, and someone had turned it into a hunting ground. Investigators moved fast. Within 48 hours, they linked the 3 victims through digital forensics. Cell phone data showed a cluster of pings near the same wooded area where Camille Quarles' body was found inside Layla Silvernail's car. That vehicle, now soaked and half-submerged in a retention pond, became a crime scene of its own. Inside, blood patterns told a story. At least one victim had been shot inside the vehicle, before being discarded. The common denominator? All three teens had been with Tahj Brewton and Christopher Atkins in the hours before their deaths. Social media DMs, Snapchat conversations, even TikTok posts hinted at a group dynamic spiraling out of control. One chilling message, later recovered from a private Instagram group, read simply, "If they cross me, they get what's coming." It was traced back to Brewton. The manhunt began. Atkins, the 2-year-old, was found first, shaking, silent, and alone. He cracked under pressure during interrogation. What started as denial evolved into a chilling confession. He admitted being present. He described locations. He named names. But as detectives dug deeper, his statements began to wobble. At first, he claimed Brewton pulled the trigger on all three victims. Then, he said he himself helped lure them, but didn't know they'd be killed. Finally, he suggested Robinson, the third suspect, had fired at least one shot. Which version was true? Investigators grew wary. There were inconsistencies in timelines. Some of Atkins' recollections didn't match the phone records or physical evidence. Surveillance footage placed Brewton at a convenience store, while Atkins claimed they were elsewhere. A defense expert later described Atkins as highly impressionable, possibly manipulated. Still, the core remained intact. The group had moved together, and 3 people had ended up dead. Meanwhile, Brewton was on the run. His name hit the press. His face was plastered across Florida news outlets with the warning, "Armed and dangerous." Law enforcement deployed drones, dogs, and helicopters. It took 5 days to find him, hiding in a wooded brush with supplies, a burner phone, and a loaded weapon. Back at the station, he said nothing. No denial, no confession, just an unblinking stare. The prosecution faced a dilemma. How do you charge a minor with 3 counts of first-degree murder without triggering constitutional backlash? The answer lay in precedent. Thanks to recent Supreme Court rulings, juveniles cannot receive the death penalty, and life without parole is restricted. But Florida law still allowed for life sentences with parole review after 25 years. So the state moved forward. Brewton was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder with a firearm, armed robbery, tampering with evidence. Atkins, though only 12, struck a plea deal, 40 years in prison. In exchange, he testified. Robinson's case was severed, awaiting separate prosecution. In the courtroom, the prosecution painted Brewton as the architect. The one who removed his ankle monitor, orchestrated the ambush, selected the victims. He was, in their words, a predator among peers. But the defense pushed back, arguing diminished capacity due to age, lack of full brain development, and an environment of trauma and neglect. They cited psychological evaluations, including one from Dr. Robert Kropp, who stated that Brewton operated with impaired executive function due to his youth. It didn't matter. The facts were immovable. 3 teens shot, 3 names buried, and one boy, wearing a monitor meant to track his every move, vanished long enough to become their executioner. As the prosecution closed their case, one question lingered in the air. Did the system fail to stop a killer, or did it raise one? The courtroom was silent, not the respectful silence of justice, but the loaded, unbearable silence of grief, anger, and disbelief. Wooden benches creaked as family members shifted in place, clutching tissue packs and photographs. At the front, Tahj Brewton sat motionless, flanked by attorneys, wearing the same cold stare he had during his arrest. This wasn't a trial of guilt. Brewton had already taken a plea deal. What was at stake now was sentencing, how many years he would spend behind bars, and whether he would ever walk free. The defense opened with a calculated tone. His attorney leaned heavily on precedent. Supreme Court rulings that limited harsh penalties for juveniles, studies on adolescent brain development, and Brewton's own background. He is a child, the defense insisted. A deeply troubled, underdeveloped mind who, in the absence of guidance, became the product of a broken system. They pointed to expert testimony by Dr. Robert Kropp, a psychologist who testified that Brewton's cognitive functions and emotional regulation were severely impaired due to trauma, unstable housing, and a history of abuse. The science is clear, Dr. Kropp said. He cannot be judged as though he were an adult, not without ignoring everything we know about adolescent neurobiology. But the prosecution wasn't swayed. They laid out the facts with surgical precision. Brewton had removed his ankle monitor, knowing full well it would sever his supervision. He had lured each victim under the guise of friendship or shared plans. He had shot each of them in the head, at close range. He had helped move and dump their bodies one by one. He didn't just pull a trigger, the state argued. He planned. He manipulated. He erased 3 lives with the composure of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Atkins' plea deal gave prosecutors a key weapon: insider testimony. Though only 12, his words carried immense weight. From the stand, his voice trembled as he recalled what Brewton had said before the murders. "We have to do this, or it's us next." The defense tried to dismiss Atkins' testimony as inconsistent, given his changing story during early interrogations. But the damage had already been done. The imagery was too vivid, the motive too clear. Then came the victim impact statements. Layla Silvernail's mother approached the podium, holding a photo of her daughter in her cheer uniform. Her voice cracked as she read a letter Layla had written before a state championship game, thanking her mom for always believing in her. She had plans. She had dreams. "And you took them," she said, staring directly at Brewton. Michael Hodo's father wore a t-shirt with all 3 victims' faces printed across the chest. "3 children," he said. "3 bullets. And all you've got is 16 years behind you. What kind of future did they get?" Even the judge, a man often described as unflinching, paused after the final statement. He looked directly at Brewton and said, "You orchestrated the death of 3 juveniles without pretense or justification. This was not a mistake. This was a mission." Then, one by one, he read the sentences. Life in prison for the murder of Layla Silvernail. Life in prison for the murder of Michael Hodo Jr. Life in prison for the murder of Camille Quarles. 20 years for armed robbery. 8 years for tampering with evidence. The sentences would run concurrently, but consecutively to prior convictions Brewton had already received for armed carjacking. He would be eligible for review after 25 years. But as the judge made clear, eligibility does not mean freedom. As the bailiff led Brewton away, he didn't look back. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. One mother whispered, "Monster," under her breath. Another simply wept. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked the state attorney what this sentencing meant. "It means," he said, "that even if you are 16 and you orchestrate a massacre, you will answer for it." But the question that lingered as the doors closed was this: can justice truly be served when all you have left are 3 headstones and a teenage killer who never said sorry? In every courtroom, there comes a moment when the focus shifts from what happened to why. Facts yield to interpretation. Sentences are handed down, but meaning remains elusive. The case of Tahj Brewton demands more than legal closure. It demands psychological reckoning. By all accounts, Brewton was not insane. He was not delusional. He knew right from wrong. He knew that cutting off his ankle monitor was illegal. He knew that luring friends into remote locations would not end with laughter. What Brewton lacked was not cognition, but empathy. Not intellect, but conscience. What makes a 16-year-old orchestrate the execution of his peers? According to Dr. Kropp, the forensic psychologist who testified during sentencing, Brewton exhibited signs of developmental trauma, early exposure to violence, unstable caregivers, and chronic neglect. These are risk factors, not excuses. They explain the framework, not the fire. Dr. Kropp noted Brewton's limited impulse control, emotional detachment, and elevated need for power in social settings. He described him as psychologically armored, guarded, distrustful, and highly reactive to perceived threats to dominance. In simpler terms, Brewton was a child raised in survival mode, where control equaled safety and emotion was weakness. But others saw more sinister patterns. An independent profiler described Brewton's behavior as cold, calculated, and narcissistic. His actions, the profiler argued, were not impulsive but strategic. He didn't explode. He planned. He cleaned. He moved on. That distinction matters, because in juvenile justice, the debate always returns to one word: rehabilitation. Can this person be reformed? In Brewton's case, many experts are divided. On one side are those who argue that the adolescent brain is malleable, that with time, therapy, and structure, even violent offenders can be reshaped. Brewton, they say, is the product of generational failure, poverty, broken institutions, absent fathers, untreated trauma. In another zip code, he might have been a coder, a soldier, a scholar. On the other side are those who see an emerging sociopath, someone who not only killed, but did so with composure, who watched his victims die without panic, remorse, or reflection. Brewton did not flinch. He did not flee immediately. He stayed long enough to wipe evidence, dispose of bodies, and vanish like a ghost trained for war. The justice system must hold two truths in tension. Brewton was a child. Brewton committed adult-level evil. And then there's the community. How does a 1-2-year-old like Christopher Atkins end up riding along for murder? How does a teenager like Brewton, already in the system, go unmonitored long enough to kill 3 people? How many red flags were ignored? School counselors, probation officers, neighbors, friends. Everyone saw pieces. No one saw the picture. This wasn't just a failure of one boy. It was a collective collapse of supervision, of empathy, of accountability. In interviews, Brewton's relatives described him as quiet, distant, and angry. They said he rarely spoke, that he had trouble sleeping, that he had once told a cousin, "One day, they'll take me seriously." Was that a threat? A warning? A prophecy? By the end of the trial, even those closest to the case admitted one thing. No one truly knew who Tahj Brewton was. Not his teachers, not his family, not his victims. He was a teenager, yes, but he was also something else, something darker. A figure molded in silence, sharpened by abandonment, and unleashed without remorse. Was he redeemable? Or was he the embodiment of what happens when rage meets neglect at just the right age to do irreversible harm? The courtroom is empty now. The media vans have pulled away. The banners demanding justice have faded. But the ripple effect of the Ocklawaha murders continues quietly, bitterly. Tahj Brewton now resides in a maximum security facility where he will spend the next 25 years without parole eligibility, pending review. It won't be freedom. It will be a hearing, a process, a distant possibility. Some argue he should never be released. Layla Silvernail's mother has said publicly that the idea of Brewton one day walking free is an insult to the dead. Michael Hodo's father described the sentence as, "Mercy he never gave my son." But the law is the law, and the law says juveniles cannot be permanently condemned without the opportunity, however remote, of rehabilitation. In 2048, a parole board will review Brewton's case. If he's alive, if the system allows it, if the wounds of a community haven't hardened into stone. As for Christopher Atkins, the 1-2-year-old who helped lure victims to their deaths, his 40-year sentence stands as a haunting milestone. He will exit prison in his 50s, assuming no early release. By then, his childhood will have long been replaced by concrete and surveillance. Robert Robinson, the third suspect, awaits sentencing. His role was less defined, but no less devastating. Prosecutors continue to weigh the full extent of his participation. Meanwhile, public reaction remains divided. Some see the case as a damning reflection of youth violence, gang recruitment, and systemic neglect. Others see it as a sign that our juvenile justice system is too lenient or too harsh, depending on whom you ask. In online forums and community halls, one question echoes louder than most. If kids are capable of killing like adults, should they be punished like adults? There is no consensus, only pain. Ocklawaha, once a quiet dot on Florida's map, has become a symbol of what happens when warnings are missed, when guidance is absent, and when violence becomes currency among children. The town still remembers, the families still mourn, the justice system moves on. But beneath it all remains a truth no sentence can erase. 3 teenagers are dead. 1 teenager pulled the trigger, and a nation still doesn't know how to stop it from happening again. Perhaps, in the end, justice is not found in bars or verdicts. Perhaps justice lives in the questions we're still too afraid to answer. What happened in Ocklawaha wasn't just a failure of 3 boys. It was a failure of everyone who didn't see them coming. This case forces us to confront a brutal truth. Violence isn't born overnight. It grows in silence, in broken homes, in overlooked schools, and in communities that confuse toughness with survival. Tahj Brewton wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was a teenager walking among us, suspended between childhood and chaos. 3 innocent lives were lost. But how many warning signs were ignored before that trigger was pulled? We must stop seeing these stories as isolated tragedies. They are symptoms of a system that reacts after the damage is done. The justice system handed down sentences, but real justice demands more. It demands prevention, accountability, and above all, human connection before it's too late. If you're a parent, a teacher, a neighbor, ask yourself, would you have seen it coming? Would you have stepped in? We want to hear from you. Do you think the justice system got it right in this case? Should juveniles ever be eligible for life sentences? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could be the start of a conversation we've waited too long to have.